Good afternoon. I'm Alex Kindler, partner in charge of business valuation and litigation support here at H2R CPA. Very often we're asked by family law attorneys to assist in equitable distribution matters. Of course, the most important thing in equitable distribution is to help gather the list of assets that a couple has for the possible division later on. Very often there's a discussion as to have we actually captured all of the assets that a couple has. This is where forensic accounting comes into play. So today we're going to focus on some of the assets that sometimes couples overlook or in some cases try to hide from their spouse. So as far as overlooked assets, some things that you may not consider: security deposits. So if you have a security deposit for an apartment, that's kind of obvious. But people can also have security deposits or monies they put down on storage lockers, automobiles, any kind of home improvement project. So those deposits are marital assets that need to be considered. Frequent flyer miles. If one or both of you are travelers, you may have accumulated a lot of frequent flyer miles, and those miles very often can be divided in a divorce setting. So we don't want to forget about our frequent flyer miles. If a party has a timeshare, again, an asset that could be overlooked, but certainly the timeshare does have value and needs to be considered. Tax refunds. Certainly if a party files a return and they're going to be getting a tax refund, whose account is that refund going to? Or if the refund is being credited to next year's tax, under whose Social Security number is that tax refund going to be credited? Similarly, capital loss carryforwards. You can have thousands of dollars worth of capital loss carryforwards that were created in prior years. In future years, when the return's filed, who gets credit for the capital loss carryforward? Jewelry. If one or both parties have a considerable amount of jewelry, watches, again, those assets could have a lot of value. We don't want to forget about them. And then there are things such as antiques, artwork, hobby equipment, gun collections, coin collections, stamp collections. These are all very often assets that are overlooked, and in some cases may actually merit getting an appraiser to take a look at these things. So those are some of the kind of assets that sometimes are overlooked in a divorce. Now, what about assets that sometimes are considered to be hidden? So the idea of hiding cash or assets can take many forms. For instance, taking cash and converting those to traveler's checks, which they then keep in their dresser drawer. Now, if a party has taken cash and put it in a jar and buried it in the backyard, frankly, that's an asset that you're going to have a very hard time finding. Sometimes a party may take cash and put it in a safe deposit box. Usually that's an easier asset to find because if there are safe deposit boxes, typically your attorney would have the ability through bank records to find a safe deposit box. Sometimes a party will establish a custodial account in the Social Security number of a child, move money into that account as well, so it's not obvious to the other spouse that the account even exists. Sometimes money might be invested in a partnership or an investment club. The partnership or the investment club may not even issue a K-1, so it may not be readily apparent that there is another asset in the form of an investment that exists. Again, a little bit tougher to find. Some parties will consider buying savings bonds or bearer bonds. Again, these are assets that generate interest and income, but they're not reportable on a tax return, so it may not be obvious that they exist. For very devious spouses, depending on the relationship with the employer, the employee could talk to the employer about possibly delaying a bonus that they were going to receive in a certain calendar year to defer it to the prior year. So it may not be considered property or income while the divorce is going on. A party could make payments for debt, but the debt is not a real debt. It's a debt to a friend, with the idea after the divorce is finalized, that debt would then be, basically the cash would be returned to the spouse. The other thing is that a party could do would be make payments to a girlfriend or a boyfriend, paying for gifts or travel or rent, college tuition. Again, these are assets or expenses that are difficult to find because once the checks are written, they're out of the account and they really don't show up as assets. Another area which hopefully would not be overlooked are retirement accounts, 401ks, individual retirement accounts, 403bs. Those kind of accounts typically should be available or readily known because of withholding on a payroll, on a paycheck. But again, we don't want to forget about those. Life insurance, another area. If a party has a whole life policy, that policy is gaining cash surrender value. Again, cash surrender value, another area, an asset that is important to be considered. Also, what about overpayments, for instance, on credit cards? A person has a credit card balance of $1,000. They write a check for $5,000 to the credit card company. So they're sitting with a $4,000 credit balance. The money's out of the account. You look at the check register, you'll see a check written to a credit card company. Seems legitimate, but without actually getting copies of the credit card statements, you wouldn't know that credit balance was there. The same really could be applied to the IRS. A party could be making estimated payments for their taxes. They bump the amount of the estimated payments that really need to be made. And so essentially the Internal Revenue Service is holding the asset for the spouse, which is again why we need to take a look at tax returns to make sure that overpayments and estimated payments are applied properly. And finally, some employees may be privy to getting stock options, employee stock purchase plans, deferred compensation arrangements. So it's important for us to take a look at, do these plans exist, and has the employee taken advantage of them and actually have options available to them in the future. So these are the primary areas I wanted to cover today. Overlooked assets, hidden assets. Certainly there could be many additional areas that we haven't touched on. If you have questions about any of the things that we've talked about in this video, please feel free to contact me. If you need the name of a family law attorney in your area, we also can provide names of people who are familiar with these issues.